Hello to our wonderful listeners. Today's guest has a very inspiring story. I'd like to welcome Brandon Peacock. In June of 2020, Brandon was shot 3 times as a bystander while walking in for a haircut in Ottawa, Canada. He was hit once in the left leg, once in the chest, and a bullet also pierced the femoral artery in his right leg. Doctors told him he would never walk normally again. Instead, he ran his first marathon just over a year later and has since fundraised hundreds of thousands of dollars for other trauma survivors through his charity, Hit the Ground Running. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Lauren.
It's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this conversation because I know we both believe in the power of turning your adversity into your advantage. I was telling you when I woke up from a coma with a traumatic brain injury following a horse accident, doctors had limiting beliefs about my future, and I set out to prove them wrong. And we meet today to highlight your story to help others do the same. I know if we can turn tragedy into triumph, our listeners can too.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's always nice for me when I connect with people in the trauma space who've actually been through. I
Mhm.
think these sort of like massive obstacles in life, I think there's so many people out there who learn about recovery and resilience and all these
Yeah.
themes from a book, let's say, and maybe there's some value in that, but there is, in my mind, only really one way to learn about all of this stuff, and it's to have the opportunity to experience it, as weird as that might sound. So I've got a ton of respect and admiration for your recovery journey as well, and a lot of the things that you've been through.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can connect with some people, and kind of show them what people are actually capable of, even though they might be written off by the industry professionals we have in place right now.
Yeah, there's nothing like being thrown into that real life experience. So let's dive right into it. Bring us back to the moment of the shooting.
Yeah, so at the time I was working as a corporate consultant. I'm Canadian, so in June 2020, during the COVID pandemic, everything was locked down. Like we were fully, like you couldn't go basically to any stores, you couldn't go to barber shops, you couldn't go to any service-based industry, you couldn't go anywhere. Basically, you were left to stay in your house. And we had a 1 week window where barber shops and these like semi-essential services opened up so we could go, take care of ourselves.
Wow.
So during one of those weeks in June 2020, I went to get my haircut 5:45 p.m. right after a regular work day, working from home. And I walk into my barber shop. I'm about 10 steps away to entering the door. The woman whose husband owns the shop is holding the door open for me because they don't want you touching the door handles due to COVID at the time. And two cars pull up, four people in each car. Guys jump out of the first car and I believe the second car as well, and they start opening fire on the barber shop. It turns out there was a man who was sitting outside at the time I was walking up to the door. He was sitting on the bench. He owned the attached building, the barber shop. He sprinted through the barber shop door that was being opened for me to go get my haircut. And the shooters ended up just opening fire trying to get him. But with that doorway being the only way to safety, basically,
Right.
I sprint towards the door. I was able to launch myself and the woman who was holding the door open for me into the shop. So I was the third person in, just because I was the furthest from the door.
Right.
Fortunately, the woman there didn't get hit. I was able to kind of use my frame to shield her. She's incredible. But I did get hit 3 times. So I took, like you said, one bullet to the left side of my chest, which crazy enough, like you could almost see a little bit here at the top of my collarbone. It's hard to see through the camera, but the bullet exited at the left top of my collarbone, entered at the bottom left of my left shoulder. So it missed both my heart and my lungs, broke all my ribs, but it ricocheted off one of my ribs and like circumvented the heart of the lungs. So I was like the luckiest dude in the
Yeah.
world if that was the only bullet that hit me. The second bullet that hit me grazed my left knee, so it was kind of like a ricochet bullet and wasn't too big of a deal. And then the third bullet that hit me blew up my femoral artery. So, for those of you who don't know, the femoral artery is actually, from what I've been told, the second worst place you could get shot after the carotid artery or the jugular, whatever the major artery is in your neck. It's actually worse than getting shot in the head, from what I've been told, because now your quality of life that you survive is very different. I'd probably rather be shot in the artery than the head.
Right.
But you bleed out so quickly after being shot in the femoral artery that most people die from the injury. Fortunately, I had the woman who saved. I was able to shield.
Yeah.
Began compressing my wound on my quad immediately after I was shot using the barbershop towels. So she's compressing the wound on my leg. I'm compressing the wound on my chest. She's certain I'm going to die at this point, so she hands me the phone. I call my mom. I told her I was going to be okay. I was like, "Don't
Yeah.
worry about me. I'm going to be fine." But I just got shot. I want you to hear it from me. And then as I'm on the phone with my mom, a police officer comes flying through the door. He gets a tourniquet on my leg in 4 minutes. So I was told had it been 4 minutes and 30 seconds, I probably would have bled out. But he got there quick enough, like just quick enough to give me a fighting chance to make it to the hospital that night. So he, along with the paramedics, rushed me to the emergency room here in Ottawa, where they basically did what's called a double fasciotomy to my right leg. So they slit two big holes in my right, like bottom quadrant of my leg, just around my calf, to stop the blood from pooling at the bottom of my leg. And then they rushed me into an 8 hour surgery, which was a femoral bypass surgery. I was told that I had a 50-50 shot, not at the time. My parents were told that I had a 50-50 shot of surviving the surgery and about a 10% chance of keeping my right leg. So my parents were basically just praying that I woke up an amputee.
Yeah.
Very fortunately, the surgeons did an incredible job, saved my leg, saved my life, and gave me the opportunity to fight back. I mean, the next morning, like you mentioned, when I woke up, the leg was in really bad shape.
Yeah.
Like it was
Yeah.
about as destroyed as it could have been. I was 45 pounds lighter, so I'm about 6'2", 190. I was down to about 140 pounds
Yeah.
after the surgery. So I was like in rough shape, but
Yeah.
I survived. And
Yeah.
they told me that I'd be lucky to walk normally again. And basically, it was unlikely I was ever going to return to playing sports or doing any of the stuff that I did previously. And that I should just be thankful that I kept my leg attached to my body. I took that as kind of a challenge, similar to what you alluded to. And I knew I wanted to do something pretty crazy right off the bat. I knew I wanted to run a marathon within the year, like almost immediately within the first couple of days in hospital. Yeah, even though
What
those
I,
first few days I
that's what
couldn't
I was
even like
wondering.
move.
Like, did you have this resilient, like, growth mindset immediately after the surgery, or like, how long did it take you to get there?
Almost immediately for me.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
think, one of the big moments for me was because I'd called my mom. My dad actually showed up to the hospital that night, and my mom was at my cottage, so she couldn't get into the hospital in time. But my dad was working, and he basically just like left work, showed up at the hospital ER room, and they wouldn't let him come into the hospital. They denied him. They're like, "Your son's not here. Your son's not here. Your son's not here," because everything was gang related. They couldn't release my name. They didn't call my parents. And then on top of that, it was COVID. So they were like, "Your son's not here. You
Yeah.
can't be here because it's a health risk for you to be in the emergency room if you're not like, immediately in
Right.
need." So they kept pushing him away. And then one of the doctors who was on my case saw him and was like, "This is this kid's dad? Like, yeah, like bring him
Yeah.
in here. His kid's dying," you know? So he, at the time I was 23 years old, he came into the room, and that's, I'd say, really where my resiliency truly started. Like I was fighting, but at that moment, I'd lost so much blood. I was so weak. Like my whole body was numb. I was scared.
Mhm.
And my dad just gets in there, and he didn't even really speak too much, which was weird. He kind of came in and just smiled and held my hand. It was very stoic. But then we were in there for about 15 minutes together, and I'm being prepped for surgery, and he looks at me, he says, "Brandon, how are you feeling? How are you holding up?" And I look at him, and it's funny, he's actually calling me right now. But he looks at me, says, "Brandon, how are you feeling?" I say, "You know what, man, not too good.
Mhm.
Like, not too
Yeah.
good at all."
That's
And he
right.
looks at me, he's like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "Man, my leg is really starting to hurt. Like the pain is just really starting to set in. The adrenaline's wearing off at this point." And he looks at me like I just told him I won, the Powerball jackpot, right? Like this is the best news he could have ever heard. He looks at me and is like, "Man, if you got pain, you've still got a leg. It's the
Wow.
second you stop feeling that pain, you got to be worried." And it was in those moments, like my entire recovery flipped. Like I thought about that the day I woke up. I thought about that the day after the day I woke up. Like every day afterwards, the perspective had shifted because it could have been so much worse. And in my mind, I actually got really lucky, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I was pretty resilient off the bat, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but that
Yeah.
was really one of the big ones.
I wanted to ask, who Brandon was before this incident and who he was after. Like, was this incident something that really changed you, or were you already like super resilient and someone who followed, their big goals and aspirations and went after it before the accident? Or did this really like shift things into perspective, showing you that things can change in an instant?
Yeah, it changed me a lot, and it changed me for the better in a lot of ways. It probably changed me for what people could argue is the worst in some ways too. But I definitely, before the shooting, I was working, like I said, as a corporate consultant. Like I'd gone through school. I was out drinking with my friends every weekend. It was such a big part of like living that corporate lifestyle.
Mhm.
I thought that I was living the dream because I was living what my parents had always told me was the goal, right? I came from a family, my dad was a UPS truck driver and my mom stayed at home for most of my childhood, taking care of the kids and bringing us to sports and all of that stuff. So I grew up in an environment that was very, focused on me just getting into the corporate world and making money. And that was deemed to be the pinnacle of excellence, right?
Yeah.
So when I got there, I thought I was doing everything that I was put on this earth to do. And then after the shooting, while I was laying on that ground bleeding out, I got to kind of learn my dying thoughts as a 23-year-old, right? And in those moments, I kept echoing, like, are you proud of the legacy that you left behind on the Peacock family name? Like, if you don't wake up tomorrow, are you going to be happy with what your friends had to say about you at your funeral, right? And those moments kind of stuck with me moving forward, and it changed my willingness to take risks, right? It changed my perception of time, right? I realized how limited the time that you have on this earth is, right? After going through something like that. And it kind of made me realize, like I could take all of these risks and totally fail, and it's still not going to be that bad. Like
Right.
I'm playing with house money at this point, right?
Yeah,
I'm
literally.
really just living on borrowed time as it is. So
Yeah.
it changed me for sure. And I think it made me realize pretty quickly on that I wanted to do things, in servitude to a greater purpose, if that makes sense. Like I'm
Mhm.
not particularly someone who's overly religious or anything like that, but I'm pretty spiritual, and I'd like to think there's a greater purpose to my existence on this planet. I'd like to think that there's a reason that, you
Yeah.
know, I survived the way that I did. I mean, again, the fact that I had a bullet that literally like dodged all of my vital organs is craziness,
That's
right?
wild.
So I I really just try to live my life now in a way that if I die tomorrow, I'm going to be happy with the way that I lived previously. And so it did change who I was. I think that was always something that was inside of me. Like I feel like I'm just living out the things I was too afraid to
Yeah.
pursue
Yeah.
before the shooting.
Hmm. So, talk to us about recovery and what that process was like for you, because I'm sure that was challenging. I'm sure like there were really difficult days as you were recovering. And how soon were you able to start? I know you ran a marathon. Like, talk to us about your journey getting out of the hospital and through recovery.
Yeah, so recovery was two different parts for me, and I think the first was the physical recovery, which in my mind was actually pretty easy,
Mhm.
which is strange to say. And then the second was the psychological recovery, which is a
The
lot
mental,
more challenging, the
yeah,
mental side
yeah,
of things, right? And the physical recovery, basically the whole reason I was able to recover so well is my best friend when I got shot is a physiotherapist. And yeah, I was the perfect candidate to actually get shot. If someone had to, I was young, healthy before. I had a best friend who was a physiotherapist, and I had this just like tenacious work ethic where I loved being the underdog. Like I loved kind of being written off. So recovery for me, I got to work out 5 hours a day, 7 days a week for free with my best friend who pushed me so hard that we made strides like lightning quick. So the
yeah,
way that the insurance systems are set up in Canada, like I was denied for my insurance claims 4 times. When they finally accepted me, they sent me in one session a week to a physiotherapist who basically just hooked me up to a stim machine and didn't do a whole lot for me. But through my friend, I worked out 5 hours a day, 7 days a week, and like we worked out hard. Like there was days where he would be bending my heel back to my butt, trying to straighten out my leg, and I had bullet fragments still in my quad. So he's literally pushing shrapnel further into my quad to bend my leg to straighten it out, and just put a pillow in front of my face and just said, like, scream into the pillow, like,
Oh my
just
gosh.
like, we got to do this.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening with that, actually, an important point to note is because it was COVID, he couldn't practice in clinic as a physiotherapist. So he was at home with this little rinky dink gym in his basement that we just like lived in.
Wow.
So again, fate, I
Yeah.
guess you could
Yeah.
call it.
Literally.
Um, but we started to make progress so quick that within 2 months of the shooting, I was back on the ice, right? So like, I'm Canadian, obviously, like hockey is something that's really important here. I
Yeah.
was literally skating 8 weeks after being told I'd never walk normally again, right? And then 10 weeks later, I was running my first kind of like 2 to 5K runs, like super, super choppy, like
Mhm.
walk runs, but I was starting to move again.
Yeah.
And, we made all these evolutions so quick. Like, I was off crutches in 4 weeks. I was walking again 3 weeks after
Yeah.
being shot. Like, I remember walking into one of my first follow-up appointments and the doctors just being like blown away that I wasn't in a wheelchair, right? And all of that came from just this intense,
Yeah.
tenacious, like daily physiotherapy routine that we
Yeah.
adopted. And that was awesome. Like, it was easy for me to do the physical recovery because all I had to do was show up and work hard,
Right.
right? That's the easy part. Whereas the psychological side of the recovery was really different, and it was a really, really unique challenge for me, because I had like severe PTSD. So I would walk out, especially as someone who just, I wasn't involved in gang activity, right? Like, I was
Right.
not somebody who
Right.
would ever be exposed to this life.
You would
I would
never
walk into the
imagine that happening to you, so you weren't mentally prepared for something like that to happen.
Yeah, and so it reset the way that my neurological system worked, right? Like, my nervous system worked,
Mhm.
right? So like, I'd walk into the grocery store and I was scared to death. I'd walk down the street and from my apartment to the gym and I was scared to death. There was days like, one day, about 2 months out from everything, I had like a full blown panic attack in the gym where I remember I basically lived in the gym after all
Yeah.
this, and I was driving home I was in the gym, and I looked around and just thought everyone was there to kill me. Like, literally, I thought like every single one of them was there to finish the job, right?
Mhm.
And my brain knew that that was irrational, but my body hadn't caught up to my brain's way of
Yeah.
thinking yet, right? So I remember having like a full blown panic attack. Still to this day, that was the scariest drive home of my entire life. Like, I thought I was going to get shot by every car I drove past. And after going through that, I realized that there's no way I could live like that
Yeah.
anymore, right? So I started reading about, all of the PTSD books I could get my hands on. I took it as like a full-time job, physical recovery, and a part-time job, mental recovery, where I was reading 2, 3, 4 hours a day. And I read about this thing called exposure therapy.
Mhm.
And what I started doing is I started just putting myself in these crazy situations. So like, 2.5 months out from the shooting, I had my roommates like popping balloons when I wasn't looking to simulate gunfire. I had them like
Oh my
jumping up in my window when
God.
I was sleeping, trying to like scare me. And the really extreme one, like the craziest one, is what I started doing is I was slowly starting to be able to run again, like run walk, and I would drive myself to the sketchiest area of the city, like what you might consider
Yeah.
like the hood,
Yeah.
and I'd go for like a 2 to 5K run in the middle of the night at like 2 a.m. And like, my goal there was, if I'm gonna die, it's gonna happen here,
Right.
right? Like, this is the part of
Yeah.
town where it's gonna happen. And the worst case scenario is that I've confirmed all these bad thoughts that I have in my head,
Mhm.
right? But
Mhm.
the best case scenario is I relearned that life is actually a lot safer than you think it is,
Yes.
right?
So true. Challenging those negative thoughts. Let me put myself in the exact situation I worry about and prove to myself it may not be as bad as I'm thinking it is.
And it fully changed the game for me. Like, the power that the people who had over me totally flipped, right? So like, I remember the biggest moment for me when I realized that I was kind of over that side of the recovery
Mhm.
was, I had this dream, and people talk about dreams where they're like back in their traumatic event, but I had this dream where I was in a shooting situation with the people who shot me. Like, I had a pretty good memory of what they looked like, because they had like, they were wearing red bandanas, so like, it was identifiable for sure.
Right.
And I remember in my dream, like, I'd been shot, but I almost like just like popped back up basically and just like kind of like shot them back or something like that. And it sounds so like kind of, mundane and like meaningless. But to me, it was like I had regained the power, right? It's like, these guys did not hold anything to me. Like I was capable of surviving and thriving through what I'd been through. And all of that came just from like exposing myself to all these things that were so horrifying, right? Like going back to the scene of the shooting, I was there within a month. I was there like back at that same spot. I filmed a podcast there. I'd sit outside the shop every like couple days. I'm like sweating bullets. I'm horrified, but like slowly but surely my nervous system started to reset. And I think, I think that was probably the biggest part of like the psychological recovery. So like the physical recovery, it was easy because you just had to push through pain that I knew how to
Yeah.
do. Like I knew how to be in pain and work hard, but the psychological stuff was a lot more challenging, but also a lot more necessary because
Yeah.
most people avoid that side of the recovery, and it's
I
hard
think
to process down the road.
you realize how powerful the mind is and that it leads to physical symptoms, like with the PTSD.
Yep.
And so when I listen to your story and I see the physical recovery, I see routine, consistency, and I see a lot of momentum. Like as soon as you started working out every day, you could feel the effects of that and you were working towards a greater goal. And with the mental, it's really retraining your thinking. And you were doing that by exposing yourself to situations that were causing you anxiety and stress. And so it brings me like, I feel like this is $1 million question that so many people struggle with. How do you shift your mindset from being a victim to being a survivor, which is exactly what you did?
It's tough. There's so many different answers I could give to that, but I think the single biggest thing to me, and this is what I tell all of the kids that I work with as like the number one, lesson, is the day that you got shot or the day that I got shot, if I had died that night, it would have been on the people who shot me. That would have 100% been on them. But the second that I woke up and had a fighting chance, if I didn't do everything I could to recover, that's on me, right? Like they're not there holding me down in the bed, preventing me from going to physiotherapy, preventing me from reading these books. Like they might have altered my life and made it a little bit, less ideal, but also it's not on them. They don't control you, right? So like it all comes down to when you talk about, recovery and not being a victim, it all comes down to personal accountability, right? It's a lot easier to go out there and say it's somebody else's fault. I suck and I'm not where I want to be
Yeah.
in life. But nobody else has any power over you unless they're legitimately in your house every day, holding you down, stopping you from doing the things that you know that you need to do to get to the direction you're going. It's on you. And people don't like recognizing that in
I
today's
don't.
world, but it's so important.
I love that. And what comes to mind is like, it's not what happens to you, it's what you choose to do with what happens to you.
Yep.
And it's that accountability piece that is huge. You ran a marathon after being shot 3 times and told that you would never be able to walk normally again. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
And talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've run two since. It's about
Wow.
4 years removed. I'm actually in training for my first Ironman right now, which is
Wow.
going to be horrifying because I don't know how to swim and I've never biked
We can't
before.
even keep up with
So
all that you're doing. So inspiring.
no, it's I haven't launched any of that yet. It's
Okay.
all super under the radars. So
Yeah.
the first marathon, honestly, it sounds so weird to say, but like we used it as a fundraiser for the charity. But it was like the most selfish thing I've ever done because I didn't really care, like I cared about the fundraising piece, but for me, all I wanted to do was prove to myself that I was back, right? It was nothing more than that. I just wanted to do some good with it. But what ended up being the most beautiful part about marathon training was I did it with like I think like 8 or 9 of my closest friends. Like we had a big
Yeah.
group of us, and every week, you know, we spent 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours together, right? And at the time, I was going through it with everything after the shooting. I was trying to figure out this new life that I was navigating, not just the injuries, but I knew I wanted to change my career, right? I actually like quit my job and lived off my savings and didn't know what I was going to do with my future. And I had all these struggles, but what was kind of beautiful in a weird way was all of my friends were going through something too. We were going through these like quarter life
Yeah.
crises in our like mid 20s where people were like going through like the end of relationships, right? Like
Yeah.
they'd broken up with long term partners. I had friends who didn't know what they wanted to do for work and were trying to figure that out. Everybody in that group was going through something hard, and this marathon training kind of became like therapy in a
Yeah.
weird way, right?
Yeah.
Because I did psychotherapy, and I personally think there's a lot of value in it. But for me, I was not with a good psychotherapist. I was not with someone who helped me, she just kind of validated my struggles without actually providing me with the tools necessary to be accountable to them. So what became beautiful about my runs with the boys is we talked openly and genuinely about the things that we were struggling with, and used the marathon training as this, you know, resilience building tool that showed us what we were capable of
Yeah.
to pursuing the things that we were kind of chasing in life, right? So the marathon training, physically, I guess it was hard. Like it definitely wasn't easy. It was hard on the body for sure. But it was the best year of my life,
Wow.
honestly.
I love that, the
um,
power of community and all working towards like a common goal. It's a
yeah,
lot of value in that. And I want to share that I actually signed up for my first 5K in a couple of
nice.
months. I just signed up 2 nights ago. So, Brandon, give me some tips on prep. It's nowhere compared to a marathon, but I'm really excited about it.
I think it's all just mental. I mean,
Yeah.
especially like you look like you're pretty athletic. I'm sure you have a good baseline.
Yeah.
It all is just, when you get cramps, running through those cramps and not stopping,
Oh,
it's
you got to run through
about, you got to
it.
run through it. That's it. That's
Okay.
a good tip
Okay, there you
actually. So when you start running, the first few times you'll get cramps. That's normal.
go.
Run through it, and then you'll never have them again. Like I
Wow.
had really bad cramps the first like 2 weeks of marathon training, and I have not had them once in the last 3 years because my body just like doesn't recognize them the same
Okay.
anymore.
Brilliant.
Again, I don't know the science behind that. That's just
Yeah.
anecdotal advice. It's
That
worked
life
for me.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, but
First
I'd say, yeah, tips wise, it's 80% mental, and you're capable of so much more than you probably give yourself credit for. Most people are like that.
Hey,
Um,
maybe
so
next
you're
time we
good.
chat, I'll be training for my first marathon.
I hope so. I'll be following along.
Amazing. So we love hearing about daily routines. Do you have a daily routine that helps you stay focused and motivated?
Honestly, no, and I should. I'll be honest. I'll be honest here. I won't say there's areas that I'm great at, and there's
Yeah.
areas that I struggle with. And organization is certainly one that I don't optimize.
Mhm.
So I'm just starting to get better at using my calendar, as trivial as that is.
Nice.
But routine wise,
Hey,
if
I
there's
see I see Jesse Itzler's big ass
yes, the
calendar
big S
and it's
calendar.
right behind you. Yes.
Yes, it is back. I don't use it enough, but I
Okay.
should. I think the biggest thing for me that's kind of like thrown off my routines is I travel a lot.
Yeah.
So it's hard to settle into things. But on the days I find myself most effective, so when I am in the optimal routines that I have, I've minimized my social media intake. I think that is like the single most important thing. Like everyone has these like 100 things you need to do to be successful.
Yeah.
Literally just cut out social media, and I
Right.
spend like 30 minutes a day reading. And those 2 days, like those two things alone, like will make any day a good day for me.
But here's the
Um,
question for you. How do you cut out social media when you're using it as a business?
I have an iPad that I post from, and then I use an app called Opal that blocks me from social media, even if I wanted to use it. So
Wow.
it is really challenging,
Yeah.
especially because we do most of our fundraising through social media.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people will notice is like, especially my friends who know me well, if anyone's watching this, I'm terrible at answering messages on Instagram. And it's
Mhm.
because I'm legitimately just never on the platform
Yeah.
outside of when I'm posting.
Yeah.
Um, so it is tough for sure, and it might hurt me a little bit when it comes to,
Mhm.
let's say, like engaging with my community that
Yeah.
I've built up.
Yeah.
Um, but at the end of the day, I think most of the influencers that I've had an opportunity to connect with, like people with big platforms, a lot of them do the same thing, and they
Mhm.
do that because consuming all of this content is just going to distract you from the
Yeah.
actual things that you need to do, right? Like
Yeah.
most people know what they need to do every
Right.
day, but
That's
you
so
get
true.
this decision paralysis. You start not doing it, and then you just start watching reels as a
Yeah.
distraction,
Maybe a
right?
huge
And
time suck. I'm like, wow, I just
yeah,
wasted like 20 minutes scrolling. But it's also
yeah,
I have valued building a community and responding to those who are engaging with me on there. But I too have to find a balance, and I have a time limit that I get to spend on Instagram every day, and that's around 20 minutes.
nice.
Occasionally I'll like override that, but I'm trying to stick to the 20 minutes.
Yeah, and it's hard too, especially when you use it for business purposes.
Yeah.
There is value. And one thing I'll do as well, if I am in a mode where I'm like consuming a little bit more, because I train not for profits on social strategies. Like I have to be going through and understanding, content a little bit better. is
Mhm.
I'll have like a burner account that I use that's literally just used for consumption. And then I'll
Okay.
block off the other, my charity account and my personal accounts. Like I'm not consuming anything. I'm not kind of like brought in by what the algorithm
Yeah.
wants me to be
Right.
consuming. And I'm just breaking down the certain pages that I follow. So it's tough for sure though.
Yeah. So, Brandon, you used what you went through to help others by starting Hit the Ground Running. What are your primary goals and your mission for this nonprofit?
Yeah, so Hit the Ground Running is the charity that I started basically to pay it forward for all the work that my friend Frank did with me as a physiotherapist. So the goal of Hit the Ground Running is to help trauma survivors reach their new 100% after a life-altering injury. So similar to how I have, similar to how you have as well. Um, what a lot of people don't realize is there is like a massive gap, I think, in what would be considered like optimal recovery therapy that is provided by insurance companies and public funding versus like where they're at, right? And I think the systems we have in place are A, really hard to secure funding from, and B, they're tailored to the lowest common denominators, I guess you would say, right? The people who aren't willing to show up every day and put in the work and try their hardest. And what I'm trying to do with Hit the Ground Running is I'm trying to empower those individuals who are willing and ready to sacrifice and work their tail off with the resources necessary to fight as hard as they possibly can, right? So right now we're helping, funny enough, we've started helping particularly spinal cord injury survivors along their recovery journeys. Just by coincidence, we kind of ended up going that direction.
Yeah.
But trauma survivors as a whole is the group that we serve.
Okay.
And we help provide them with physiotherapy,
Right.
psychotherapy, and right now we're actually doing regenerative medicines as well. So we've got a kid who's going to Colombia next week that we paid for his stem cell therapy, which is about $50,000.
Wow.
But we've given him the opportunity to have this regenerative medicine procedure to try and repair the damaged tissue in his spinal cord region so he has the best chance to walk again. He's 27 years old. He has
Yeah.
three young kids. He's, single father who just loves his kids so much, loves life, and wants to recover for them. So, yeah, our goal is to give trauma survivors access to the tools necessary to recover to their fullest and not just like adapt to this new life that they've been kind of forced into. So yeah, it's wonderful. I love it.
Incredible work that you're doing, and to be able to help others like that, I ultimately think is what brings the most happiness is when you can help someone else.
I think it's such a big part of the healing process, right? So with the kids that I mentor a lot of these trauma survivors that come through my charity as well. And one of the things that I'll always tell them, is my ultimate goal is to get them to a point where they can do what I'm doing with them for somebody else, right? Because for me, I
Yeah.
see so much purpose in the situation that I went through that I view being shot as an awesome thing. Right.
Mhm.
I think it was one of the biggest blessings of my life was to come as close to
Right.
death as I did.
Because
Right.
we
Um,
wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation if either of us weren't didn't go through experiences that really challenged us and almost took our lives.
Yep, 100%. And I think going through it and finding that purpose in the struggle is kind of what the human spirit seeks, right? Like I think one of the things that we see in the modern world is there's so many people who've never had to go through and endure anything overly challenging that they almost try to claim these like victim statuses
Yeah.
so that they can start to feel empowered by making change and making a difference, right? And I think we're lucky enough to have been through things that actually give us that understanding and perspective of life, and then we can kind of use the struggles we've been through to A as like a tool to prosper, I think, in our own personal lives, but B as a tool to empower others and help them get through their unique situations. So it sounds like you had the same experience too.
Yeah, amen to that. I think that I don't wish an easy life for anyone. I think adversity breeds character and like
Yeah.
helps you develop and get to know yourself because all of a sudden things are hard and it's like working through that struggle and coming out the other side a more liberated and evolved human is one of the most life-giving and transformative experiences.
Well, and I think it shows you what you're capable of, right? If you're able to come through it. And it's why, for example, the way that we pick the people our charity supports is, maybe controversial, I guess, but like I don't have like a set of, application forms that you have to fill out, and we decide who we pick. Is I hop on calls with people and I figure out if I think this person is somebody who I can coach to be successful, or if I think this person is someone who's just trying to use all of the hard work that I've put in to grow this thing as like a cash grab, right?
Yeah.
And I think the reality is there is a lot of people in that second bucket, and I think the people in the first bucket also sometimes maybe get tainted because of the people in the second bucket, if that makes sense. And I think that there is so many people out there who are capable of such awesome, such like incredible things that just need the support and the
Yeah.
guidance. So I believe in people. I think like
Yeah.
that's my big thing is most of us are good.
I'm with you too. And I read a quote recently. It was like, someone will rise to the value you put on them.
Yep.
And so to believe in the good in people and to treat them with high value and enable them to rise to that. And I think that all comes with believing in them.
Yeah, well, it sounds so cliche, right? But it's like hope is like everything when it comes to recovery and any sort of traumatic injury, right? So I work with these spinal cord injury survivors who've all been told they'll never walk again, right? And there's three kids in mind that I speak with on a week to probably more frequently than a week to week basis, but quite often, Gavin, Isaiah, and Sam, and the three of them are different parts of their journey. Sam is, I think, like 4 or 5 years out from his injuries. Gavin is about 2 or 3 years out, and Isaiah is about a year and a half, a year out. And the three of them genuinely to their core believe they're going to walk again. Like they fight every day as if they're
Yeah.
going to walk again. And they're starting to make these crazy strides, right? Doctors told them there was a 0% chance, right? Like it was legitimately, you will never walk again.
Mhm.
And now, 2.5 years in, for perspective, Gavin was able to use a walker and his spasms to walk like with no supports, right? And he's still at the very start of that journey,
Yeah.
but he's starting to do the thing that was impossible, right? And like he might not ever be running marathons again, right? I'd say
Right.
most likely he won't be. But had he stopped chasing that goal of walking again,
Yeah.
he'd be in a dark place right now,
Yeah.
right? Like he needed that hope to believe in to keep fighting for a greater purpose.
Mhm.
And regardless of whether or not he attains that end goal, he's going to find himself along that journey, right? Like I've watched him grow from this scared kid who was shot, saving his brother's life, by the way, exceptional, exceptional kid, but shot and paralyzed,
Mhm.
and he's scared and
Yeah.
for like scared and depressed and sad with his life as all of us would be if we had our ability to walk stolen from us, to
Mhm.
this like incredible leader, this awesome,
Mhm.
awesome, just amazing kid.
Yeah.
um, and he's gone through that transformation journey because he had hope, because he didn't just give in when the doctors told him it was impossible. And he might not ever walk again, right? I don't know. I think he will. I believe if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be him.
Mhm.
Um, but because he has hope, he's become the man he aspired to be through that journey. And like, it's not about just like, you know, it's really not about going through and attaining that goal and like winning the thing that you've set yourself up for. It's just about having hope that you can reach that point and finding
Yeah.
yourself along the journey. So
Yeah. And challenging other people's beliefs, especially if they're limiting beliefs about you, not being attached to the end goal, but the journey and the process of becoming and challenging yourself along the way. And that's beautiful that you get to witness all of these individuals that you're helping try and walk again after being paralyzed or being shot. Like that's major.
it's huge for me too,
Yeah.
right? I think like there's a lot of days, I've been fortunate enough to do some awesome things with my recovery, and it's
Mhm.
easy to look on me as somebody who's done
Mhm.
these things that are so like inspirational or whatever. But like there's a lot of things I struggle with too, right? And like having the opportunity to be a part of these young men's journey and watch them go from point A to point B to point C and evolve, it's as inspiring to me as it is,
100%.
maybe what my story might be to some other people.
Because listen, Brandon, you could have had this happen to you and been, woe is me, poor me, I've been shot. Look what you've done, but also there are people who have it much worse than we do. And so for so many people who are sitting around feeling sorry for yourself and your circumstances, like everyone's growing through their own thing. And you can't compare whose is worse or what have you. But when you hear these stories like yours of how you were resilient and persevered, it's really, really inspiring. And it's a lesson for others that like you can do it too. So as we wrap up, I want to ask you, what advice you would give to others who have experienced trauma or going through something really difficult. They feel stuck, they're struggling with their recovery. What advice do you have for someone like that?
There's a lot of advice that I have. I think I probably dropped the biggest piece earlier in the podcast where I'd say, it's not the person who's put you in this disadvantaged situation's fault if you don't recover. It's entirely on you. Right? Like, be accountable to yourself and your recovery, and you'll be really grateful for that. But also, the other piece of advice that I want to share is when I got shot, I had a ton of people who reached out to me and they were telling me, like from a genuine place of empathy, like take your time, process everything, like don't be too hard on yourself, all of that stuff. And I almost want to dispute that and say if you've been through a life altering situation and you're really going through it right now, it's valid if you feel terrible, if you're scared, if you're frustrated, if you're questioning why it was you. You can think all of those things and you could be battling these demons that you should never have had to face, right? I think that's a very real truth. But also, don't delay the process, right? The quicker you start trying to recover and starting to fight for yourself and showing up and being accountable to you and the future version of yourself, the quicker you're going to heal and the happier you're going to be, right, with the recovery process. Because eventually, if you don't start that process and you keep pushing it off, you're going to get stuck, right? You're going to be at a point, I use nerve regeneration as an example, but after you've been shot and you have severe nerve damage, you have like 12 months to have like 90% of your nerve regeneration progress, right? So if you've just gone through this thing and you've waited 4 months to go into physiotherapy, you've lost like a third of the time that you had to do 90% of your recovery,
Yeah.
right? And when you're 2 years down the road and you've adjusted to this new life and you're set in your new ways, you're going to wish more than anything you could go back to the start and start
Yeah.
fighting a lot quicker, right? So if you're going through something hard right now, the best time to start the growth process was yesterday.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it's fine. Like you can feel all of the ways that you feel. I
Yeah.
felt all of those same ways, and it sucks. It really does. But also take care of your future self because
Mhm.
this is the time to show up for yourself and be accountable and work hard. And you're capable of a lot more than you think too.
Yeah. And I think what's important to highlight here is like you can feel the pain, the anxiety, the hurt, the trauma, all of it. And at the same time, start working towards something better for yourself. Don't wait for those
It,
feelings to go away. Start now.
the only way you're going to get rid of those feelings is to start.
Exactly.
Right?
There you go. Mic drop. Brandon, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about Hit the Ground Running and the charity work that we do, we are fully tax deductible in Canada and the United States. So anybody who wants to donate, you could do so at our website, www.htgrcharity. It's like Hit the Ground Running Charity.com. And if you want to find me personally, you can check out my Instagram at Peacock, like the bird, underscore Brandon, Brandon, or our charity page at HTGR Charity on Instagram.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story with us.
No, thanks for having me, Lauren.
It's my pleasure.